All right, what's up, my mathletes? That's right, Mr. Muscarella coming at you. And in this video, we're going to take a look at some introduction to some basic geometry vocabulary that will serve as the foundation for a lot of this course. So let's get right to our show, shall we? And here we go. We're going to start off with the very first figure in geometry, and that's called a point. And a point is going to represent some location in space. All right, it has no width, no length, or no depth, and it's always going to be notated with a capital letter. All right, now there's two ways to name a point. You can actually use the word point, so you could say point, but then remember, capital letter, so we'd have to make sure that's capital A. And then another way that we could do it is just write a capital A without the word point in front of it. So those are your two options for naming the figure that's in our first diagram. Now a line, on the other hand, lines. So when we take a look at lines, they're understood to be straight. All right, they're understood to be straight. So straight up, a line is just understood to be straight. It's not crooked, it doesn't bend, it's not curvy. You'll study lines like that in other courses because they won't be called lines, they'll be called curves or polynomials. So more on that in those courses. But line will be straight and contain an infinite number of points of at least 2 points. And then key thing right here, forever in two directions. So it's going to go in two directions forever and ever and ever. And just like the point, we're going to use capital letters, but since we've got two of them, because that's how we'll know it's different than a point, because a point only uses one capital letter. So a line is going to use two capital letters. So two capital letters. Now you've got some options here with this line of which capital letters you want to use. So say I'm going to start here at point C. Now I could go from C to A, and when I draw it, I'm going to put arrows above C to A. So that's one option. I could start at C and go A because that arrows above those means it's going to extend in both directions forever and ever and ever. But maybe I wanted to go from C to T. Now that's going to include A, it's going to be in there, but that would again go from one spot to another forever and ever and ever. Another option, say instead of starting at point C, say this time I wanted to start at point A. Now I could go from A to C, and again with the arrows above it because you want to make sure your mathematical notation and your writing is solid, or I could go from maybe point A all the way to point T, and because they extend in both directions, that would include point C that we kind of left out of that for AT, like the Appalachian Trail, yo. Or AC for Atlantic City. Now those are all ways we could name the line, but those aren't the only ways. Notice how this one right here, CA and AC, they're the opposites. Okay, so I could go in the opposite, I could switch those around, and that would still describe this line right here, but it goes forever and ever in both directions. So that would cover everything. Now, another option that I could do, because I started with point C, I started with point A, I could also start with point T. But notice if I do that, if I start with point T and go this way, so I could have T to A. So T to A, and put the arrows above that. That's one option. Or I could also have from T to C. And notice how both of these kind of pair up literally with, let's see, we'll go with these guys. I could have them be the opposites of these guys right here. So these are all also written in the opposite order. So you got some options of how you want to write. Two capital letters, arrow over both of them, and you're good to go. Now, that's one option here, is using two capital letters. Your other option, you could just use a lowercase script thing. So if you look right here, we've got a little M right there. So you could also do that, and it's got to be cursive. So in your best handwriting, you could say this. And you have to put the word line in front of it. So you would say line M. So that could be another way that you do that. Now, careful here. Don't say like this, line CAT, or do something like this. Just put CAT. So you don't want to use 3 letters. 3 letters are reserved for something else. 2 letters are used for lines and also line segments. So more on segments coming up. Speaking of segments, here we go with line segments. So here, a line segment is like part of a line. It's going to have a definite beginning and ending, so it's going to consist of 2 endpoints. 2 endpoints. A line went on forever, Oh, and I misspelled that. I needed a T in there for straight. But a line goes on forever, and a line segment consists of two endpoints. And again, just like the line, when we talk about segments, we're going to use two capital letters indicating the endpoints. So if I wanted to go from D to G for this particular diagram, that's one option because my endpoint, so that's what I've got to make sure I have here. So there's an endpoint and there's an endpoint right there. So I could either say DG like that, or I could switch them around and go G to D. So you got your options. Either one of those works. Now with the figure, that's our very last one here, the ray. Okay, a ray is going to be a portion of a line. It's got an endpoint, but it goes only in one direction. Like a line goes in both directions forever and ever and ever. A line segment is contained, but a ray starts at a spot but then goes on forever. So we're going to use two capital letters here, but one of those capital letters, when we do that, the very first letter is going to have to be what's called the end point. So I'm going to put a little highlighter here on the end point. So the end point is going to be G. So when we go to write this version, when we go to indicate that, the G is going to have to be what we start off with. Now we can go from G to I, and we'd start with G, and then we put an arrow above the I. Or we could start with G and continue on past I and go to P. So those are our two options with that. Both of those would describe that same figure and be okay when you go to do that. All right, so those are your first four basic terms in geometry. Looking at those figures. Now, of course, we got angles, and angles have some options too. So when you look at angles, they're going to be two rays. They're going to share a common endpoint, and that endpoint is going to be called the vertex. And then the other parts, the rays, they're going to be referred to as sides. So if we look here in our little picture, we've got the vertex is going to be vertex R. And then our two sides that are going to go on in different directions. We've got one side that has the S and the H, and the other side over here that has the B on it. Now, when we name angles, so one thing, one letter was for a point. Two letters could be either a segment or a line. And then three letters can be used to describe an angle. All right, so when we do that, again, capital letters on this. So we're always going to make sure we use capital letters, and we're going to have this little symbol here that's going to be a little angle symbol. So we could start here, point S, and then we would have to go to the vertex, and that's R, and then out the other side, which would be H. So angle SRH is one option. Now, in that same spot, say we didn't want to start with S, say instead we wanted to start with H, we could say H, and then R, and then B. So that could be another spot. And I put a B there, I forgot to write a B. And then HRB could be another option. We still have another option. Maybe we want to switch that around and start with point B first. R still has to be in the middle because that is our vertex. So we could do BRH. Yo, that's like BRH, like Broad Run High School. That's cool. Or we could do maybe start with B, go to our vertex R, but then come out the other side, and that's S. Hey, Broad Run School, like it. So those are four different options that you could do using the three capital letters. But in every case, I want you to pay really close attention. That vertex is always going to be the part that is in the middle. Now we've got another option here, so let's take a look at this option. We could just use one capital letter right there. That's it. So if we use the one capital letter, that capital letter that we use has to be the vertex. So if we're going to write it like that, we could just say angle R just like that, and we'd be okay. Now notice on the inside here, if you take a look, we've got a number right there on the inside of our sides, right by the vertex. So another way that you could say that, you could say, or you could also name that, and this is the last way, by its numeric label. So we could also say angle 2. So those are two different options with just a singular thing. So we could just say angle R or angle 2, or we'd use all three letters. But again, remember, they got to be capitalized, so just take your time on that. Now, we're going to take a look at all these other amazing terms here. We got opposite rays, collinear, and intersection. So let's first take a look at opposite rays. Two rays that share a common, and that's right, they're going to share a common end point. and whose sides, they're going to lie on the same line. So this is kind of weird. So check this out. Let's draw this first, then we'll make some sense of it. So say we've got this part right here. I'm going to call this F, point F. And I'm going to have the ray is going to go out that way, and we're going to just call that, say, J. So that's ray FJ. But then we also are going to start right here, but then we're going to go in the opposite direction, and we're going to go through, say, point K. So this is what this kind of means. Two rays that share a common endpoint whose sides lie on the same line. So this is really just going to be a straight angle. And a straight angle, as you will learn now and more later, a straight angle, that's 180 degrees. So that's just going to be a straight angle right there. And so FJ, so that ray, and ray FK. So again, notation is important. So make sure that F has to come first because that's the beginning. So those two guys right there, they are, and I'm just going to abbreviate, now we'll write out our opposite rays. So ray FJ and ray FK, those are opposite rays, but they go in the opposite direction, so it ends up just creating a line. Now we look at collinear. Collinear, that's a whole other world, all right? So collinear, that's a term that when we use, we're going to describe points that lie on the same line. So collinear points just mean they lie on the same line. So if we have a line, so let's go ahead and draw a little line right here. So whoop, there's a line. And so we've got these 3 points right here. So say one of them is B, give me a B. Say another one's point R, give me an R. And the last one is point H. So then what we would say is, oh, B, because remember we only use one capital letter. So for point B, point R, and point H, all 3 are collinear. So all 3 of those points are collinear. So B, R, and H are collinear. All right, so that's that. Now when we take a look at the intersection of 2 lines, so the intersection or the intersection point, it's going to be a point where, or sometimes it could be a set of points that 2 or more figures have in common. So a lot of times when you think about this for a second, so let's just go ahead and draw maybe 2 lines, shall we? So let's take a look at that. So when we draw lines, remember you want to put arrows on the end. We'll use a little lowercase letter for each one. In this case, we'll call it M and N. And then here is where they crisscross. That would be the intersection point. And that point of intersection, we'll just generically call it an I for this one. So line L and line M, in this case, that common point that they have is point I. So line L and line M, they intersect at point I. So I is your intersection point. So you would go ahead and write that out. Line M and line L intersect at point I. So that's where they matchy-matchy. That's where they match up. Now I've got our last couple of things coming up in here. We're going to talk about adjacent angles and segments, and we're going to talk about measuring pieces, segments as well as angles, because there's going to be some very important little things there when we go to talk about that. So let's first take a look at adjacent segments, what all of that means. And when you take a look at it, it's going to be pretty straightforward. So let's kind of highlight a couple of different pieces here. So we're going to have this part right here, segment AB. Then right next to that, we're going to have B all the way out to C. And then the very last part, let's go ahead and go from C all the way to D. So that line or that segment is kind of broken up into those areas. And let's talk about this word adjacent, because right now in class, you're probably sitting adjacent to somebody or next to somebody. So when we talk about adjacent segments and adjacent angles, we just want to see which ones are right next to each other. Now, when you take a look at AB to start with, so segment AB, and again, little segment bar goes above it. So that is adjacent to, so segment AB is adjacent to, so if we look at that, we could say, well, right from B to C. So BC is a segment that is adjacent to AB. because it's right next to it. Now you could have also said, because B starts here, goes through C, and goes all the way to the end. So you could have also kind of gone this way with it and said, oh, segment BD would have been another acceptable option for that. So AB is adjacent not only to BC, but also to BD. Now, speaking of BC, so if we start with that one, and that one's kind of in the middle. So BC, that one is adjacent to not just one, but two segments. So it is adjacent to segment AB and segment CD as well. So that one's kind of nice because that one's in the middle. So you got some options with that one. It's adjacent to those two parts. But one of the things you want to be really careful of is this. Sometimes people will incorrectly say AB would be adjacent to CD, and it's not. So be careful you don't say that. AB is not. It's not next to. It's not adjacent to CD. So kind of think about it like this. If you were sitting in class and you're right here and this is kind of like your desk. So your desk is the AB spot. And then next to you, you've got somebody else sitting next to you, and they, you know, your desks are kind of next to each other. But then over here, you got somebody else sitting in that spot. So your person, say A, somebody else's person B, person C. Well, you're not right next to C, bro. Sorry, not going to happen. That's not you. So that's just one way, another way to kind of think about it there. Now we talk about angles. Angles are adjacent similarly. So let's take a look here at this one, angle MAT. So that angle right there, so angle MAT, that is going to be adjacent to the angle that is right below it. And that is angle TAH. Okay, so those two angles would be adjacent. So angle MAT, you could say, is adjacent to, and then angle TAH. So that's one way you could say that angle MAT is adjacent to angle TAH, because they're next to each other. They share a common vertex, and so they're right there. Now, if you want to flip that around, maybe make an angle HAT, well, hats off to you. Good job. All right, and we got one other thing to do here, just one other, and that's when we talk about measurements in geometry, right? So when we measure figures, we're going to talk about the unit. So when we measure the figures, we're going to talk about the distance between endpoints, such as some linear unit. We're going to sometimes have centimeters, and you can abbreviate that cm, or maybe inches in this standard system. Or you can have millimeters maybe, or maybe yards, or even miles, or even maybe kilometers. Who knows? You've got all sorts of options. But now, say we were to measure segment AB, and we're like, all right, well, that's, say, 5 centimeters long. Well, one of the things that we do when we talk about the notation here of a segment is you're just going to include the number 5, but then also add the unit on the end of it. Now here's a small little detail. If you notice the AB part, the segment AB part, we drop the segment part above it. So you want to make sure you drop the bar, drop that bar that's above the AB when you're talking about the measurement or how long that segment is. So drop the bar when talking about or describing the measure or length. So that's one of the things you really want to be careful of, because that is a small little technical writing thing. We want to make sure our technical writing skills are on point. Now, similarly, when we're talking about angle measurements, right? So when you measure an angle, we're going to have this very, very, very specific little symbol, or this little M that's right out in front. So you want to make sure you have that in front of the angle symbol, because if you just have this without it, so if you just have this, you're like angle ABC. But if you're actually measuring it, then we have to put that little M in front of it, just like we have there. And then whatever value we were to measure that to be, say this angle measured 70 degrees, then we would just say that that angle measures 70 degrees. So that means the measure of angle ABC. So that little M right there, that means, so when we talk mathematics, we say the word measure in the space where that little M is. So that little guy right there means measure. So make sure you talk mathematics correctly. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, man. I appreciate it. You go out there and you make it a great day as always, and I'll catch up with you soon. Peace out.